Your wolf is there, but the body you were born into wasn't strong enough to hold it. And so it waits inside you, and the waiting it costs you.
Will it always cost me?
He was 4 years old when the sage knelt to his level and told him the truth. Not the softened version, not the careful words adults construct for children, the ones built like little walls to keep real things out. The sage had always believed, that a child who would one day be king deserved the truth of his own body before he deserved anything else. Your wolf is there. The old man's voice had been very quiet. We can feel it, something vast and powerful. But the body you were born into wasn't strong enough to hold it, and so it waits inside you. And the waiting it costs you. 4-year-old Corin had looked at the sage with his serious dark green eyes and asked the only question that mattered. Will it always cost me? The sage had not answered. That silence was the first thing Corin ever understood about the world. He grew up inside it. The chamber smelled of cold stone and old books and the ghost of every medicine that had ever failed him. 23 years of treatments, formulations, the sage's careful, persistent, increasingly desperate attempts to reach a wolf that lived behind walls Corin's own body had built. Herbs from the Southern Territories, compounds from the Eastern Bloodline archives. 3 treatments that had worked briefly, partially, enough to raise hope before withdrawing it, and 19 that hadn't worked at all. At 20, he had looked across this same chamber at the sage and said quietly, without anger, with the specific exhaustion of someone who has been fighting a war they didn't start and cannot win. Stop. The sage had argued. His mother had wept. The council had petitioned formally, which he had ignored formally, which was one of the few advantages of being a dying heir. The formalities became remarkably easy to dismiss when the stakes were already decided. He had dismissed the maids next. Not cruelly, just systematically. The first had quit within 3 days, which he had expected. The second lasted a week, which surprised him. The rest had gone faster, as if each departure made the next one easier, as if his refusal had its own gravity that pulled people toward the exit the longer they stayed near it. He was 27 now. The chamber was entirely, completely his. Books stacked in a system that made sense only to him, histories on the left window ledge, bloodline texts against the far wall, the philosophical volumes in 2 towers beside the hearth that he'd built and rebuilt so many times. The bottom ones had permanent indentations from the weight. The hearth itself was the only concession he made to comfort. He was always cold, had always been cold, the illness stealing heat from him the way it stole everything else gradually, without announcement, without the courtesy of warning. The medicines on the table by the door he had stopped looking at. The sage had sent a new formulation 3 months ago. Dark glass bottle. A note in the old man's handwriting that Corin had read once and set face down and not touched since. The note said he remembered it precisely because he remembered everything, the sharpness of his mind, the one thing the illness had never managed to reach. This one is different. I have been wrong before. I believe I am not wrong this time. Please. The please had been the hardest part to set face down. He had managed it. He was on his 14th consecutive day in the chamber when he heard the door. He did not look up. The footsteps were different from the ones he'd catalogued over 23 years of maids and physicians and counselors who believed that physical presence could substitute for actual persuasion. These were unhurried. Not tentative, just unhurried. The particular quality of someone who had decided on a pace and saw no reason to deviate from it. He heard the satchel set down on the stone floor, heard the particular sound of its clasps. Still did not look up. The air in this room. A voice, even, clear, neither aggressive nor soft, is 3 days old at minimum. He turned a page. The shutters on the left are warped at the top hinge. That's why they don't seal. That's why it's cold. A pause, not uncomfortable. The pause of someone completing a thought before continuing it. Though I suspect the cold has other causes as well. He looked up. She was taller than he expected. Fair skin warmer than his, the difference visible even in the low light of the chamber, something alive in her complexion that his had lost, so gradually he'd stopped noticing its absence. Pale amber eyes, wide set, direct, already moving across the chamber with the systematic attention of someone conducting an assessment they hadn't announced. She was slight, built narrow, at first look unremarkable. She looked at him. He revised that. The eyes were not unremarkable. There was something in them that had no single name, not boldness exactly, not warmth exactly. Something that encompassed both, and added a third quality he couldn't immediately identify. The quality of someone who has already decided something before walking into the room, and is simply waiting for the room to catch up. You're the new maid. Zarya. The correction was not sharp, just precise, not a category, a person. He returned to the book. You have the same information the others had. You know what happened to them. I do. Then you understand this is temporary. Her eyes moved to him from across the room. I understand you believe that. He looked up again. She had crossed to the window, the left one, the warped hinge, and was examining it with a practical attention that had nothing performative in it, just looking at a problem and thinking about it. Don't touch the shutters. I'm not touching them. She turned from the window. I'm looking at them. Her amber eyes found the table by the door, the medicines, the untouched formulation, the sage's note still face down exactly where he'd left it. She looked at it for a long moment. Something moved across her expression, not pity, which he would have recognized and responded to immediately. Something quieter, more considered. She crossed to the chair across from his chair, his chamber. The chair no one had sat in because no one had stayed long enough to sit. She sat in it. He stared at her. He stared at her. What are you doing? Sitting. She folded her hands in her lap with the ease of someone entirely comfortable in her own body. You don't want to discuss the medicine. We don't have to start there. Her eyes came to his face. Held. Tell me what you're reading. The silence stretched. She didn't fill it. That was the thing he noticed, that she didn't rush to fill it the way every other person who had ever sat across from him rushed to fill it. She simply waited, her amber eyes steady, her hands folded in her lap, her presence occupying the chair without apology and without performance. His wolf that fragmented, silent, 27-year-old absence shifted. Barely. Almost nothing. Enough. Get out. Her hands stayed folded in her lap. No. She came back. He had not expected that. He had lain awake not with insomnia exactly, but with the light consciousness of a body that slept shallowly, always slightly braced for the next collapse, and thought, in the grey early hours, that she wouldn't. They all left eventually. The ones who stayed longest always left with the most finality, as if they needed to compensate for the time they'd wasted. She came back. The second morning she said nothing about the medicine. She adjusted the left shutter, not fully, just enough to let the cold air move, and sat in the chair and read from her own book, which she had brought from somewhere, and the silence between them was not hostile and not comfortable, and was something he didn't have a clean word for. He read his own book. He turned fewer pages than usual. On the third morning she arrived earlier than the previous two. The light was still grey, the hearth down to embers, and he was awake but not yet up, propped against the headboard with the philosophical volume open on his knee, the one he'd been working through for 11 days because his concentration had been worse lately, the words requiring more effort to hold than they should. She noticed that, he realized. Yesterday. She'd watched him read and she'd noticed. He heard the satchel clasps. Then, different from the previous 2 mornings, he heard the sound of the dark glass bottle being lifted from the table by the door. He looked up. She was standing at the table, the bottle in her hand. She turned it once in her fingers, looking at it, not at him, and unstoppered it with a quiet, deliberate motion. Don't. She looked at him then. It needs to be taken in the morning. Her voice was level. The sage was specific about that. Put it down. The formulation took him 4 months. Not arguing, just informing him, the way she always informed him clearly, without heat, as if the facts themselves were sufficient and she had no need to dress them in anything. He worked from bloodline texts that haven't been opened in 2 centuries. A pause. He believes this one reaches the wolf directly, not the body first. The wolf. Corin said nothing. You haven't tried it. I don't try things. His jaw tightened. Any more. She was quiet for a moment. He watched her face the way things moved through it before she decided, the amber eyes doing their work of thinking visibly, everything arriving a half second before she chose it. She looked at the bottle, then at him, then at the bottle again. She's going to put it down, he thought. She's going to put it down and sit in the chair, and we are going to spend another morning in silence, and she will come back tomorrow and... She tilted the bottle to her own lips. He sat forward. What are you? She held the medicine in her mouth. He could see it, the slight change in her expression, the faint bitterness registering behind her eyes, a single line appearing between her brows before she smoothed it away. She set the bottle back on the table with a careful, deliberate sound. And then she was moving, crossing the chamber with the same unhurried pace she used for everything, except something underneath it now that was not unhurried at all. Something decided. Something that had been decided before she'd even lifted the bottle. He understood what was happening approximately 2 seconds before it happened. Zarya. She was at the bed, one knee on the edge of it, then above him, her slight weight settling with a specificity that left no room for misunderstanding, one knee on each side of his legs, and he opened his mouth to say her name again with more force, and her hand came up, fingers closing his nose. Gentle, firm, absolute. His mouth opened on reflex. She lowered her face to his, and he felt the warmth of her first, that specific warmth she carried that was so different from everything in this cold room, warm in the way that a fire is warm. Not an idea of warmth, but the actual physical fact of it. And then her lips on his, and the medicine, bitter and warm and completely unavoidable, flowing from her mouth into his. He had no choice. He swallowed. She pulled back, sat back on her heels above him, and looked at him with her hands now folded in her lap, as if she were back in the chair across the room, and nothing had just happened. Her amber eyes completely composed, a faint flush in her fair skin that was the only evidence that any of this had cost her anything. The room was absolutely silent. Say something, she thought. Say anything. Do not think about how cold he was and how the warmth went out of you the moment you pulled back. Do not notice that your hands are not as steady as your face. Do not... You could have just handed it to me. Her eyes held his steady. Would you have taken it? A beat. No. A quiet admission. Nothing more. Then I couldn't have just handed it to you. His heart was doing something unprecedented in his chest, not from the medicine, too fast for the medicine. The medicine needed time, but from the sheer, total, unprocessable reality of what had just occurred. From her warmth against his cold. From the specific quality of the silence that followed. From the flush in her skin that she was working very hard to be composed about. From his wolf that fragmented, silent, incomplete thing that had pressed occasionally at the walls of him and been ignored for 27 years, was not pressing. It was moving. Not slightly. Not the barely there shift of the past 2 mornings. Something with genuine force behind it, something that recognized what had just happened, not as a medical event, but as something older, something that operated in the language of wolves rather than the language of humans, something that had a word for what she'd just done, that he didn't have access to yet. He pressed his hand flat against his sternum. The pressure was enormous. She was already climbing off the bed efficient, unhurried, as if she dismounted from the beds of dying princes every morning of her life and found it entirely unremarkable. Same time, tomorrow. I'd prefer you take it yourself. She picked up her satchel. I'll do this every day if I have to. She paused at the door, her back to him, and he watched her shoulders settle the way they settled when she was choosing her words. But I genuinely prefer you take it yourself, for both our sakes. She left. He sat in the cold chamber with his hand on his sternum and his wolf moving in ways it had never moved, and the taste of medicine and something warmer underneath it still present on his lips. He did not sleep again. He did not try. He took it himself the next morning. She arrived to find the bottle already open, already measured, already set on the table beside the chair where he was reading. He did not look up when she came in. She did not remark on it. She set her satchel down and began the quiet work of her morning, the notes she kept in a small leather journal he had pretended not to notice until the 5th day, when curiosity had overridden pride. "What are you writing?" he'd asked. "How you look? How you move? Whether things are changing? And are they?" She had looked at him over the journal with one eyebrow fractionally raised. "Ask me in another week." She said that a great deal ask me in another week. It was, he had decided, either the most infuriating or the most honest thing about her, and he hadn't fully resolved which. Probably both. Probably that was the point. The days accumulated. He noticed things in the order they became impossible to ignore. The cold in his hands was first. Not gone, not anything close to gone, but less. The specific deep cold that had lived in his fingers for so long it had become part of how he understood his own body, present and unquestioned, was slightly less present. He noticed it on the 6th morning, reaching for the medicine bottle, and held his hand in the grey light and looked at it for a long time. He said nothing. She noticed him looking, said nothing either. "She's giving me room," he realized. She has been giving me room this entire time. On the 8th day, he read for 4 hours without the concentration faltering, held the thread of a complex bloodline argument across 40 pages without losing it, without the familiar sliding feeling of his mind refusing to hold what he gave it. He finished the chapter and sat with the book closed in his lap. That's different. He did not say it aloud, but his hands had tightened on the cover, and she had looked up from the journal, and their eyes had met across the chamber, and she had looked back down without a word, and somehow the silence of it had been more than words would have been. His wolf knew before he did. Every morning when he took the medicine, the bitter taste, the warmth of it, the specific sensation of something reaching past the body toward the fragmented thing behind it, his wolf responded with a growing, accumulating presence that had no precedent in his experience. Not a full wolf's presence, not whole, but more whole than yesterday, measurably more whole than the day she had walked in. He did not tell her any of this. She knew anyway. He could tell she knew by the quality of her mornings, the way she wrote in the journal with a slightly different quality of attention, the way her amber eyes moved over him with something underneath the professional assessment that she kept very carefully below the surface. Not excitement. She was too controlled for that. Something quieter. Something she was managing. He recognized the managing. He had been managing things for 27 years. On the 11th evening, she was still there past her usual hour. The light had gone amber in the chamber, the candles doing the work the failing daylight couldn't. And she was at the table completing something in the journal, and he was in the chair, with a book he had not been reading for approximately 40 minutes. He had been watching her instead. Not the way he watched anyone else in his space, not with the cataloguing attention of someone tracking a potential threat. Differently. With the specific, unwilling attention of someone whose eyes keep returning to a thing without being directed to, and who has stopped bothering to direct them away. Her hair had come loose from its pins. More than the usual escaped pieces tonight. Most of it had given up the arrangement entirely and fallen to her shoulders in dark blonde waves that she hadn't bothered to fix because she didn't know he was watching. Her expression, unguarded in the low light, was concentrated and tired in equal measure, not defeated, just at the end of something. Present in her exhaustion the way she was present in everything entirely, without pretense. There was ink on her left wrist where the journal had smudged. He noticed that specifically. He noticed, and something moved in his chest that was not his wolf, not the fragmented, accumulating, medically explicable thing that had been shifting in the mornings. Something that operated in entirely human terms. Something that noticed the ink and the escaped pins and the amber light on her face and thought, "She is tired. She comes here every morning. She came back. You should go." His voice came out quieter than intended. She looked up, registered the light, the hour, began closing the journal without hurry. At the door, her back still to him, the colour in your face. A pause. It's different than day one. Measurably. She left. He sat in the candlelight for a long time. His wolf pressed at the walls. His hands were the warmest they had been in years. Ask me in another week, he thought. And for the first time in longer than he could accurately calculate, he wanted to. His mother came on the 14th day. She came at the hour she always came when she had something difficult to say late morning. When the light through the warped shutters was at its most honest, and there was nowhere comfortable to look that wasn't directly at the thing in front of you. She sat in the chair across from his, which was Zaria's chair now, a fact he noticed and said nothing about, and she laid the documentation on the table between them with the quiet, methodical care of a woman who had been building a case for 3 years with the patience of someone who understood that patience was the only weapon she had. Corin looked at the papers. Then he looked at his mother's face. She had aged in the years of his illness. Not badly. She was still precise, still composed, still the woman who had stood in front of the council for 27 years and presented a king's dignity in the place of a king. But there were things in her face now that hadn't been there before. A tiredness that went deeper than sleep could reach. A particular quality of someone who has been afraid for so long that fear has become structural, part of the architecture, indistinguishable from the bones. He picked up the first document. Councillors, 7 of them, 3 senior, 4 junior, turned over the course of 3 years through a combination of land grants, debt forgiveness, and promises about their positions in a post-Corin court that his uncle Dorian had been making with the confidence of a man who considered the outcome settled. Border lords. 4 of the 6 eastern territories promised favourable trade agreements, reduced pack tithe, the kind of concessions that could only be made by an alpha king, and that Dorian had no legal authority to make, and had made anyway. The master of coin, brought over with financial incentives and what his mother described, with a precision that suggested she had read the relevant correspondence more than once, as a comprehensive portrait of the kingdom's inevitable future. 3 years, Corin thought. While I sat in this room with my books, he turned the last page, set it face down on the table. He filed something. His mother's voice was very quiet. 3 days ago, Corin looked at her. The right of incapacity. He was still for a long moment. He knew the law. Of course he knew it. He had read everything, including the dormant statutes that hadn't been invoked in 2 centuries, including the ones everyone had agreed by collective silence to pretend no longer applied. The right of incapacity, an ancient provision in pack succession law. If an heir's wolf had not manifested by the eve of coronation, the succession passed automatically to the next bloodline claimant. No violence, no coup, no open challenge. Just law, dressed up neatly in the language of concern. He has 14 days, before the coronation. She stopped. He heard the door before she finished the sentence, the quiet sound of it opening, the specific quality of those unhurried footsteps, the satchel clasps. He had not told Zaria to come at a different hour. He had not thought to. She came in the way she always came in, reading the room before she entered it fully, her amber eyes moving from him to his mother to the papers on the table between them. She stopped just inside the door. I'll come back. Stay. Corin's voice was immediate. No hesitation. His mother looked at him, a question in it. She should hear this. He hadn't decided that before he said it. He understood it was true the moment it was said. Zarya stayed. She did not sit. She stood near the door, with her satchel still over her shoulder, her hands quiet at her sides, her face doing the thing it always did when she was taking something in. No expression visible except the amber eyes working, cataloguing, already thinking 3 steps ahead. His mother looked at her for a moment, then back at Corin. Is it changing? The words came carefully. What she's doing? Is it working? The question landed in the room and sat there, and Corin felt in the specific, unwilling way he felt everything these days, the way the illness had stripped every buffer from him, until things arrived unmediated the weight of it. The 14 years of that question asked in 100 different forms. The hope she'd carried that he'd refused to carry with her, because the distance between their hopes was the only thing that had kept him from breaking entirely under the weight of hers. He heard Zarya breathe. One careful breath. Like she was holding something very still. He looked at her. Her eyes were on him, not demanding anything, just present, just there, the way she was always there, giving him room, and staying anyway. She doesn't know yet, he realized. She keeps the journal, she tracks the changes, but she doesn't know how much. Yes, his mother closed her eyes. Just for one breath, one brief, private, unperformed moment of something that had no clean name relief and grief, and something that was neither, some specific feeling that belonged only to a woman who had been afraid for 27 years and had just been given permission carefully to stop. Then she opened them. Then we have 14 days. She left. Her footsteps faded down the corridor, and the chamber settled back into its usual quiet, and Corin sat with the papers on the table, and his wolf pressing at the walls, and the specific, complicated reality of what had just passed. Zarya had not moved from the door. He looked at her. She was looking at the face-down document on the table, the last one. The one about the right with her jaw set in the particular way it set when she was containing something she had decided not to say yet. You knew, I suspected. She crossed her arms slowly, like a door closing. 3 days ago, someone in the lower corridor was speaking about your uncle's movements. I didn't have the full picture. A pause. I do now. He watched her face. And? She crossed to the chair. Sat not with her usual ease but with a deliberateness, as if the sitting itself was a decision being made in real time. She looked at the table, then at him. I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer me honestly. When have I been anything else? The corner of her mouth moved the ghost of something dry. You have been a great many things else, frequently. She looked at her hands. Back up. How much has changed? Your wolf. Your body, since the first morning. Her eyes held his. Not what you think I want to hear. What is actually true. He considered the deflection, the half-answer, the carefully managed non-response he had deployed against every physician and counselor and well-meaning person who had asked him this question for 27 years. He looked at her hands on the table. The ink smudge was still on her left wrist from last night. She hadn't noticed. My hands are warmer than they've been in a decade. His hand pressed flat against his sternum as he spoke. The gesture had become habitual. The cold in my chest is less. My concentration holds for 4 hours where it held for 1. My wolf. He stopped. Present. Every morning when I take the medicine and for hours after. Not whole, but more whole than yesterday. He looked at her face. Every single day. She absorbed this in silence. He watched something move through her, not surprise. She had suspected most of it, but the specific feeling of having suspected something and then having it confirmed out loud, which was different, which landed differently. The amber eyes went very still. 14 days. Yes. Your wolf needs to manifest by the eve of coronation. Fully. Yes. She looked at the journal in her satchel, back at him, something working in her expression that she wasn't trying to hide this time. Then we stopped being careful. He frowned. What does that mean? It means the proximity matters. Her hands opened on the table, a small gesture, like laying something down. Every morning I've been giving you the medicine, and sitting across the room and being... She paused. Appropriate. Professionally appropriate. The word landed with a dryness that was clearly commenting on itself. And your wolf has been responding to something more than the medicine. I've known that for a week. I've been... being appropriate. Being appropriate. A beat. I think that's been a mistake. The room was very quiet. He turned that over slowly. You are telling me that the solution to a dying alpha's failing manifestation is proximity. She held his gaze without blinking. Yes. I am telling you that the very serious medical solution is for you to stop being on that side of the room. A pause. I'm aware of how that sounds. Remarkable that this is somehow the strangest thing that has happened in this chamber in 14 days. One eyebrow lifted. I administered medicine mouth to mouth on the third morning. Second strangest, he allowed. She looked at him for a long moment. Then, slowly, the composed professional surface shifted into something underneath it, something that arrived before she decided. The way everything arrived with her, and she pressed her lips together over what was clearly a very restrained attempt not to laugh. It was, he realized, the first time he had ever seen her on the edge of laughter. He wanted to see her go over it. 14 days. Quiet. The moment settling back into what it was. Their eyes met. 14 days. She moved her chair to his side of the table. On the 18th morning, he was at the window when she arrived, not leaning on anything, not managing the distance between himself and the cold glass, just standing, with his hands loose at his sides, looking down at the courtyard below where his pack moved through the morning rotation. He could feel them, not clearly, not with the full, fluent awareness of a whole wolf reading its pack, but at the edges of perception, the specific sensation of being part of something. Of other presences registering against his own. He had read about it in the bloodline texts. The way an alpha's wolf oriented toward its pack, the way a compass oriented toward north, not chosen, not directed, simply accurate. He had read about it. He was experiencing it now for the first time. He heard the door, heard her stop behind him, heard the small sound she made barely anything, just a breath. Just the quality of a breath when something hoped for has finally arrived and the hoping is over. A sound she hadn't meant to make. She almost never made sounds she hadn't meant to make. He didn't turn around. 18 days. Yes, her voice was steady. The effort of making it so was audible only if you knew what to listen for. The sage's note. He said he believed he wasn't wrong this time. He wasn't. He turned then. She was standing in the middle of the chamber, with her satchel still over her shoulder and her amber eyes on him with everything in them arriving before she decided the way it always happened with her, everything visible a half-second before she chose it. What was there now was not the professional assessment, not the careful clinical attention she maintained, not even the thing she'd been managing since the third morning, something that had been building for 18 days and had arrived, this morning, at the window. He crossed the chamber. Not carefully, not with the measured economy of a man accounting for resources he couldn't afford to spend. He crossed it the way a man crosses a room when he has decided something and is done negotiating with himself about whether the decision is wise. He stopped in front of her. She looked up at him. The satchel strap was still over her shoulder. A piece of her hair had already escaped the pins, just the one piece. At her left temple, the same one that always escaped first. He lifted his hand and pressed it against her face. Her cheek was warm. It was always warm. It had always been particularly warm against his specific cold from the third morning when she had been above him, and the warmth of her had come before anything else, before the medicine, before the moment itself, just the warmth of her in a cold room. She was warmer than ever right now. Her eyes were very still. The medicine. His voice was quiet. The first morning, yes. Barely steady. You didn't have to do it that way. I know. A breath. I needed you to swallow it. That was the only reason. She looked at him. No, simply. He looked at her face, the amber eyes, the escaped pin, the warmth in her skin that was partly the proximity and partly, he understood now, something that had nothing to do with temperature. The woman who had walked into a room where a man had decided to die, who had sat in his chair, who had come back every morning and taken notes in a leather journal and learned the specific quality of his silences and given him room inside them and stayed anyway. Not because she was paid to. Not because the sage had instructed her to. He had asked her once on the 9th day, when the question had gotten too heavy to carry, "Why do you keep coming back?" She had looked at him over the journal without looking up completely. "Because you haven't asked me to leave yet. I told you to leave on the first morning. You said get out," finally meeting his eyes. "That's different." He kissed her. Not like the medicine morning, not that charged, no choice, decision made before it was made morning that had lived in the room between them ever since. This was chosen, quiet and chosen and entirely certain, the way his wolf had been certain before he was, the way everything with her had been certain before he was. She made a sound against his mouth, small, barely there, the sound of something that has been held carefully in both hands for a long time and is finally allowed to be held differently. Her hand came up and pressed flat against his chest, over his sternum, where he had been pressing his own hand every morning when his wolf moved. She could feel it. He knew she could feel it, the pressure there. The accumulating presence from the way her breath changed against his lips, from the way her fingers spread slightly, like she was reading something through the contact. He pulled back, looked at her. Her eyes were still closed. She opened them. The amber was very bright. 10 days to the coronation. I know. Her hand still on his chest, not moving. He's going to make a move before then. A pause. Dorian. He won't wait for the formal proceedings. He knows something is changing. He watched her face. He has people in this castle. I know that too. He frowned. How long? She looked at him with an expression sitting precisely on the edge between apologetic and unapologetic. The woman who brings the firewood has been reporting to the Master of Coin since autumn. A pause. I started leaving the journal visible from the 10th day. The one I write in every morning. He stared at her. You've been feeding them information. Selected information. A slight tilt of her head. There is a difference. I've been telling them what I would want them to believe if I were trying to delay them. The silence stretched. He stared at her, working through it slowly. You have been running a counterintelligence operation out of my bedchamber. From the chair, mostly. Entirely composed. I find it's a very good chair for that sort of thing. He looked at her for a long moment. The laugh arrived before he could do anything about it. Not a controlled exhale, an actual laugh. Low and surprised. Something that hadn't lived in this chamber for years and arrived now without announcement, entirely unmanaged. She looked startled by it. Then her face did the thing he'd been waiting 18 days to see, the composed professional surface giving way completely. Her whole expression opening into something unguarded and warm and entirely, specifically hers. She laughed. 4 seconds, both of them, then composed again. But the room felt different afterward, lighter by some specific measure. He cupped her face in both his hands. Stay. Just that. The man asking, not the heir, not the dying prince, not the king in waiting. The person underneath all of it asking the person who had shown up every morning to a room full of refusal and had treated each refusal as a minor administrative inconvenience. She looked up at him. Something in her expression arrived before she chose it. Something that had been waiting in the amber of her eyes since the first morning, patient and certain and entirely hers. Corin. His name in her mouth, not his title, just his name. The first time she had used it landed somewhere in his chest, like a key in a lock he had forgotten was there. I have been staying. Her fingers pressed slightly against his chest. I have been staying since the first morning. His wolf went still. the stillness of something that has found what it was oriented toward and has no more need for urgency. Dorian made his move on the 24th day, not in shadow, not through intermediaries or carefully worded letters or the quiet repositioning of pieces on a board. He had done all of that for 3 years, and it had not been enough. A man who has run out of time runs out of subtlety with it. He requested a formal council session, full attendance. The senior wolves, the border representatives, the master of coin, who sat in his chair with the expression of a man who had placed a bet and was now watching the odds shift against him in real time and had not yet decided whether to cut his losses or commit to the original position out of stubbornness. Dorian sat across from the empty head of the table, Corin's seat, empty for months, and arranged his papers with the impeccable calm of someone who had rehearsed this, who had imagined this room, this morning, this moment, for 3 years. The warmth was perfect. The concern was perfect. The careful, loving solicitude of a devoted family member who had been forced, reluctantly, by law and by love, to act. He was very good. He had always been very good. The doors opened. Corin walked in. The quality of the room changed before he reached his seat. He felt it through his wolf, which was present enough now to read the pack energy in a room the way a hand reads water temperature, immediate and instinctive. The collective recalibration of 23 wolves, adjusting to the weight of an alpha who had arrived as something measurably, undeniably different from what he'd been the last time they'd seen him. Dorian looked up. For one unguarded second, 1/2 second, one crack in 27 years of perfect composure, something crossed his face. Not the warmth. The thing underneath the warmth. Then it was closed, sealed, perfect again. Nephew. The warmth back in place like it had never left. You look present. Corin sat at the head of the table, looked at the papers in front of his uncle. I've read the petition. Then you understand the council's obligation to. I understand your obligation. Quietly. No raised voice he had learned from watching Dorian for 27 years, that the quieter the voice, the more weight it carried. To the border lords you promised Eastern trade concessions that were not yours to promise. To the councillors whose debts you forgave against accounts that were not yours to touch. He let that sit for exactly one breath. I have the documentation. My mother has had it for 3 years. The room was very still. The master of coin looked at his hands. Dorian's face was magnificent in its control. The warmth barely flickered. The smile held. But his hands on the papers went very still in the specific way of someone containing something large beneath a surface they are working very hard to maintain. The right of incapacity is legal pack law. Measured. Careful. Whatever you believe my motivations. Your motivations are irrelevant. Corin held his uncle's gaze without effort. The law requires that my wolf not have manifested by the eve of coronation. A pause. We have 4 days. Your wolf has never. Corin let the agreement sit for one beat. Past tense is doing important work in that sentence, uncle. The stillness in the room deepened. Dorian looked at him the way he had been looking at him for 27 years, with the genuine tenderness and genuine impatience that had always somehow coexisted in the same face, both of them real, both of them incompatible with each other, both surviving. He looked for the sick child, the boy in the cold chamber, the heir who had made peace with dying. What he found was not that. Corin held his uncle's gaze. He let Dorian look, let him see the warmth in his face that had not been there before, the presence in his bearing, the wolf in his eyes that was not whole yet but was undeniably, unmistakably there. Let him calculate the distance between what he had been counting on and what was sitting at the head of this table. He watched Dorian's hands on the papers. The petition will be withdrawn. He looked then at the turned councillors, not with anger, not with the performance of anger, with the specific quality of a man who has read every document and remembers every name and is giving each person in this room exactly 1 moment to understand what that means, what the next 4 days would decide, what the world looked like on the other side of a coronation that went the way it was going to go. The master of coin looked up, met Corin's eyes, looked away first. Dorian withdrew the petition. He left the council session without speaking again. His allies watched him go and then turned, one by one, and looked at Corin with the collective, recalibrating attention of people who had been certain of one outcome for 3 years and were now doing rapid, uncomfortable arithmetic about another. Corin looked back. The session continued. The coronation was at dawn on the 28th day. The great hall was full 400 wolves of the pack, in formal witness positions, candlelight from 100 sources making the old stone warm. The tapestries that had hung on these walls for generations, holding the accumulated weight of every alpha who had stood where Corin was standing now. His mother stood to his left. She had dressed with more care than usual and was looking at him with an expression she wasn't trying to control relief and grief, and that nameless thing that was neither. The specific feeling of 27 years of fear arriving at its end. The sage stood before him with the crown, an old man, long-serving, who had knelt to a 4-year-old and told him the truth of his own body, and had spent 24 years working toward this morning with the stubbornness of someone who had decided that the truth he'd told deserved a different ending than the one everyone expected. Zarya stood to his right. She had not been placed there by protocol. Protocol had no provision for her, no title, no bloodline, no wolf, no standing in any ancient law or pack tradition that anyone in this hall had been raised to honor. She was there because he had asked her to be, because she was the reason there was a morning to stand in. She was in a deep blue dress he had never seen. Simple, clean lines, her dark blonde hair pinned with more intention than usual, and the piece at her left temple had escaped already the same piece. Always the same piece, as if it had its own opinion about being contained, and that opinion was consistent. He looked at her for a moment before he looked at the sage. She was looking straight ahead with her hands folded and her amber eyes very bright and everything in them arriving before she decided, the way it always had, the way it always would. He had known her 28 days. He knew the ink smudge she left on her left wrist when she wrote too quickly. He knew the way her expression changed when she was about to say something dry. He knew the precise quality of silence she produced when she was thinking 3 steps ahead and waiting for the room to catch up. He knew the sound of her laugh, the 4 seconds of it, on the 18th morning, and that he intended, for the remainder of however long he was given, to hear it as often as possible. He knew that she had walked into a room where a man had decided to die, and had sat in his chair, and had come back. He looked at the sage. The crown touched his head, and his wolf moved. Not through him, not against him. With him, the distinction vast, the difference between 27 years of separation and this, now, the wolf and the man, finally occupying the same space simultaneously, the gaps closing one by one with a force that had no human equivalent, the fragments gathering, the incomplete becoming not overnight, not without cost, not painlessly, complete. He gripped the edge of the dais. His vision went white at the edges, his knees held by decision rather than strength. He breathed through it with his jaw set and his hands white-knuckled on the stone and his wolf filling every space that had ever been empty in him. Filling them completely, permanently. Done. The hall went to its knees. All 400 wolves dropping in the involuntary, ancient, blood-deep response to an alpha's wolf, fully present. A sound that had no human equivalent rising from the pack. Something felt rather than heard. Something that moved through the stone of the hall itself. The sage's eyes were wet. His mother had both hands pressed to her mouth. Corin straightened, looked at the hall. His wolf whole, complete, 27 years of silence broken open into something vast and permanent lifted. And recognized. not the hall, not the pack on their knees, not the crown. He felt all of that, felt it through his wolf with the full, fluent clarity he had only ever read about and never experienced, but that was not what the wolf oriented toward first. First, the wolf turned to what was standing to his right. He found Zarya in the crowd. She was not on her knees. She was human. The pack instinct didn't reach her, and she was looking at him with her amber eyes, doing everything they always did, every feeling arriving before she decided whether to show it. He could see all of it, every single thing. He held out his hand. She looked at it for one breath. Then she crossed the hall. The court watched. The pack watched 400 wolves still on their knees, watching their alpha reach for a woman who had no wolf, no bloodline, no standing in any ancient law. She reached him, her hand in his warm as always, that specific, particular warmth, the warmth that had been the first warm thing in a cold room that had been cold for years. He turned to the sage. The old man produced the second circlet, silver, clean lines, the wolf crest at the center, understated and exact. He held it with the specific care of someone who had made a decision about it long before this morning and was now simply completing the action. Corin took it, looked at Zarya. She looked back at him, amber eyes very still, everything in them present, the way it had always been present with her, always arriving before she decided, always visible to him, and only to him. You walked into a room where a man had decided to die, quietly, not for the hall, for her. You sat in his chair. You came back every morning. You kept a journal. You ran counterintelligence from the good chair. He felt her hand tighten in his. You poured medicine down my throat. Her chin lifted slightly. You swallowed it. You gave me no choice. I gave you every choice. The corner of her mouth, that corner, the one that always moved first. You just made the right one. The ghost of something moved across both their faces, briefly, on the precise edge of something that wasn't gravity. You saw something worth staying for. His thumb moved against her hand. Before I did. Her throat moved. I saw you. Simply, completely. Not the heir, not the invalid, not the problem. Her eyes held his. You, reading your books in the cold, holding your hand in the grey light, trying so hard not to want things. He placed the circlet on her head. His wolf, complete and whole, and 27 years of silence, finally, permanently broken, recognized her with the ancient certainty of something that had always known, even in the fragmentation, even in the silence, even on the mornings when it had been barely there, barely anything, a coal that hadn't quite gone cold. It had always known, the direction of her. Luna. The hall remained on its knees. Outside, through the high windows, the dawn had arrived completely pale gold and clean, and the particular quality of light that belongs to mornings that have been waited for. He had not known, for 27 years, whether he would see it. He was seeing it. She was warm beside him. His wolf was whole. The crown was on his head. His mother was weeping, without pretending not to. The sage was smiling, the smile of a man who had told a 4-year-old the truth and had spent 24 years refusing to let that truth have the ending everyone expected. Corin looked at Zarya. She looked back at him. In her amber eyes, everything arriving before she decided, the way it always had, the way it always would. He saw the answer to the only question that had ever mattered. Will it always cost me? No. It had cost him 27 years, and given him everything worth having. The wolf had waited. 27 years of silence and fragmentation, and a body that couldn't hold what it was given. It had waited, not because it was patient, because it knew that the right person would walk through the door, and sit in the chair, and come back every morning, and refuse quietly, practically, with the specific, unhurried certainty of someone who had decided something and saw no reason to deviate from it, to leave. And when she did, everything the waiting had cost would be exactly, precisely, worth it. Thank you for watching and becoming part of this story. Subscribe and join the pack for more emotional alpha wolf romances and unforgettable stories still to come.